Remember that song that maybe you sang around the campfire at maybe church camp or even some other camp long ago? It only takes a spark to keep the fire going. Perhaps you remember that one, especially if you're maybe going to church camps around the 60s and 70s and 80s. If you're a little bit younger than that, maybe that's not so familiar to you. But it's a great song. Some churches even have it in their hymn books, and they sing it on Sunday mornings. I want to think about that. I want to think about the spark for a moment. The spark, the fire, and what comes next, which takes me to Proverbs Chapter 9, believe it or not. Earlier today, we met here in person at the church, and we were digging into verses 7 through 13 in Proverbs Chapter 9. Some fascinating stuff there that, if you missed in person, you just missed out on some stuff. But I want to dig for a moment into one particular verse that's fascinating about this passage, because this verse shows up over and over again in the book of Proverbs, but it also shows up in other books like Job and Psalm and a lot of what we often call wisdom literature in the Bible. The verse is this, verse 10, Proverbs chapter 9. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Now, you get the first part of that verse all throughout the Bible, many different places. The second part, you get sometimes, but it's sometimes a little bit different depending on which book you're reading out of. But in Proverbs, we get it this way. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding. Here's the interesting thing. Look that up in a couple different translations. I always encourage folks at Hood Memorial Christian Church and our church family, explore the Bible through different translations, because you're going to find insights about Scripture just by the different words that translators have used for different passages in the Bible. And coincidentally, I just used the word insight because there's a lot of translations that translate the word that I just read as understanding as the word insight. So, for example, the NRSV says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's the same. And the knowledge of the Holy One, that's the same, is insight. So which is it? Insight or understanding? Are those the same thing? Are they different? They're different words in English. There's some nuances there to the meaning that make a difference, that matter. And still some other translations do some different things with the word that I read to you as knowledge. So for example, one translation says this, the beginning of wisdom is to fear the Lord. That's the same, but just sort of flipped around on its head. But then it says, and acknowledging the Holy One is understanding. Now, that's a little bit different. Is it knowledge of God, or is it acknowledging God? Both of those are different, at least slightly, if not a lot. So what do we make of this? What's going on here? What is up with these words in this passage? We consistently get fear of God and wisdom is the beginning of wisdom. That seems pretty certain according to the translators, but this knowledge or acknowledging the Holy One is understanding or insight or something. What's going on there? So I want to dig for a moment. Now, we've talked before online and in person about fear of the Lord. What does that word fear mean? We've explored that a little bit in the book of Proverbs. We've talked about how it has to do with awe and respect and reverence and wonder of God, that it's not just this, I'm scared, I'm afraid, I'm cowering because of God. That the fear of the Lord as it's presented here is much, much deeper and more profound than this afraid, this scaredness that you might think of when you hear the word fear. So that kind of awe for God is the beginning of wisdom. And then there's something about knowledge, and then there's something about understanding. There's three words here, and I want to explore all three of them real quickly. Wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Because over and over again in the Bible, you'll see these three words close together. They'll be around each other. Wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. They'll seem to be used in these interchangeable ways. Which one fits what section? Sometimes folks will even translate knowledge as understanding and back and forth. And it gets kind of confusing. What's going on here? What are the differences between wisdom, knowledge, and understanding? In fact, that's a question that we often ask, even with our own language today. What is the difference between wisdom and knowledge and understanding? You might even have a hard time describing the differences yourself in the English language, much less the Hebrew language that the Bible is written in, right? But I want us to allow for a moment the Hebrew to help us understand what these words are about. 3 words in Hebrew. 1, wisdom. Wisdom is the Hebrew word chokmah. As it comes to us in this passage, chokmah is most always translated wisdom. We get it in books throughout the Bible. It's a fairly common word for wisdom. And it's almost a lot of times connected, most of the time connected with God. The word for knowledge that you heard translated knowledge or acknowledging is the word da'at. This word comes from a Hebrew word yadai, which means to know. So if you see anything in the Bible that's translated to know God or to know someone, it's very likely the word yadai, which is related, it's the root of the word da'at, which comes here in Proverbs 9. Da'at, knowledge. Knowledge seems pretty clear. Acknowledging, I think, is a little bit of an interpretive take on that passage as I read it to you in one translation. We can still ask ourselves, okay, so what does it mean to know? What does knowledge mean in the Bible? We'll go there in just a minute. The word for understanding or insight, as some translations have it, is the Hebrew word bina. Bina is an interesting word. A lot of dictionaries would translate it as to discern, to have intelligence, to be smart about something. If you go back to the root of the word bina, it literally means to think between things. Bina is about being between something. So you've got 2 things. There's a relationship between those 2 things. And you think about those 2 things and you try to understand the relationship between 2 things, to discern between 2 things, idea A and idea B. What's the relationship and how do I understand these things? Things that exist in tension with one another, things that maybe make sense, but you just understand that 1 + 1 = 2. There's a relationship between 1 and 2. So these 3 words show up here in Proverbs and many other places in the Bible as well. We've talked about sort of the basic meaning, but what does that even mean? Because we're still struggling with the words wisdom and knowledge and understanding in our own language. Well, anytime you're reading the Old Testament or the Hebrew language, it's always good to consult a rabbi because they've studied this stuff a whole lot. So I want to take us into 2 rabbis that have spoken about these words. From one, the rabbi says this: Chokmah, wisdom, is practical knowledge. How to do things, how to drive a car, how to tie your shoes, things that you can learn, things that you can teach. Now that very much fits in with the idea of Proverbs as a book about wisdom, because Proverbs has given us practical advice all over the place, right? Especially in chapters 10 and moving forward to 15, you're going to get a lot of those Proverbs that we're real familiar with. That just are giving us very daily practical advice, right? Spare the rod, spoil the child. Those kind of Proverbs, practical advice. Bina, this rabbi says, Bina is knowledge of relationships. Well, that fits with what we just talked about. The relationship of one thing to another thing. Putting things A and thing B together and logical reasoning your way through understanding those things and the relationship that exists between them. Bina can even be about intuition. But at the end of the day, it's really about trying to understand, to grasp knowledge, to gain some insight. There's that word that shows up in some of our translations. And to discern the relationship of one thing to another. In other words, you begin digging. You begin digging and trying to understand more deeply. Da'at, this rabbi says, is experiential knowledge. How you know that you're alive. How you know that God exists. How you know that something is this or that. Because you've experienced it. You have a relationship with it. And out of that relationship comes an experience of which you then know something. Something that can't be proven per se, but something that can only be experienced. That's da'at, knowing. Now that's maybe helpful. And if you applied that to the passage that we just read, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of practical knowledge, wisdom, and experiential knowledge, knowing is knowing the Holy One, is to gain some understanding of relationship, the relationship of Holy One to you, the relationship of the Holy One to the world, but digging in and knowing more about the relationships that are around us. So that's maybe somewhat helpful as we try to understand what this passage is about, what wisdom is about, what knowledge and understanding are about. But I want to move on to one other source, these rabbis that are a part of the Chabad movement. The Chabad movement is a movement of Hasidic Jews, and rabbis within this movement have defined these three words this way. And these three words are very important to the Chabad movement because, in fact, Chabad is an acronym for the three words we're talking about: Chokmah, Cha, Bina, Ba, and Da'at, Da, Chabad, Chabad. Okay, so these words are important to this movement. They've literally named their movement based upon this acronym. They say this: Chokmah, wisdom, is a spark. It is the first flash of an idea. For example, someone is struggling over a problem and they get this flash of inspiration, a eureka moment, if you will. If their friend were to say, "Okay, now explain that to me," the response would be, wait, hold on, give me a second, because I need to think about this. I just had this insight, but I'm not sure I quite know how to communicate it yet. I sort of have this aha moment, this, oh, that's something new. I've never seen that before. But the idea is still very undeveloped and unrealized. Awe of God is the spark. You follow the passage so far? Awe of God is the first flash of something much, much bigger. Awe of God is the inspiration that should lead us to something different, or as the song says, it only takes a spark to get a fire going. There's the spark. Chabad, wisdom, awe, wonder, reverence, respect for God. We keep moving on. Bina is step 2, according to the Chabad movement. It's the expansion and the development of the spark, which is wisdom, the chokmah, right? Bina is discernment. Bina is looking at the spark and examining the spark from every angle. You know how a diamond or a gem has all these different sides to the face, and you can turn it and it sparkles and it'll shine and sparkle against the wall. And every angle that you look at a diamond, you see something new and different in the reflection, right? It's got all these sides. Think about examining every single side of that diamond. That is Bina. Looking at it from all angles, exploring it, understanding it more deeply, examining every facet, every surface. That is what the understanding and insight of Proverbs 9:10. That's what it's about. The expansion of the spark. Now, lastly, da'at, the word for knowledge, knowing as we translated it. Da'at. The Chabad movement says da'at is the conclusion. It's the application of the spark, the idea, that one has then been discerning and contemplating and examining over and over from every facet. That's da'at. Da'at is what happens at the end after you've had the spark and you've looked at it and you've examined it. Da'at is where you come to because now you know something much more deeply than you knew it in that initial aha moment, because you've examined it, you've turned it over, you've looked at every possible facet. Okay, so what, Pastor? How does this all fit together? Well, let me offer you the verse, Proverbs 9:10, this way. Wisdom begins with a spark of awe and wonder at God. And knowing that God is to develop the spark, to ask questions and dig for answers, to examine in detail the spark, the awe, the wonder of God, to discern, to dive deep, to gain intelligence, to get smart, right? There's a translation of Proverbs 9 for you. Or to maybe simplify it just a little bit. Awe of God is the spark of wisdom. And yet, to know God, to experience God, to fully know God, is to explore that spark, to explore the relationship of God to you, of God to the world, of God to everything around you. That's Proverbs 9:10. Or to say it as the song says it, It only takes a spark to get a fire going. The spark, though, burns. The fire consumes all that it can. Brothers and sisters, we need to be the fire. We need to allow that spark, that aha, that wonder, that eureka moment, that mountaintop, and you look out and you think, gosh, there must be something, someone beyond all this, holding all this beauty together. And then to take that moment and explore it, to mine it to its depths, to turn it over and over and over again until you so fully understood that aha moment of God that you now have a knowledge and experience of it that is da'at, that is knowing, that is experience. Or as the song says, and soon all those around can warm up to its glowing. That's how it is with God's love. Once you've experienced it, you spread his love to everyone you want to pass it on. That's what happens when we aha, when we explore, when we discern, when we turn it around over and over and understand God more deeply, and we come to this knowledge of our divine maker that leads us to overflow the love of God, to want to pass that on to our brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. Thanks for joining me today. I hope this was helpful. I want to invite you, if you're out there, to connect with us here at Hood Memorial Christian Church. You can connect with us just by texting the word pray to 910-892-2711. That's our church number. You can also call us at that number. If we're not here at the office, at the church building, you can certainly leave a message. But it's great to text because we can get that from anywhere. Just text the word pray to our church number, and we'll ask you a couple questions and try to learn a little bit more about you and how we can be praying for you over the days ahead. We hope that you'll take the opportunity to do that and reach out and connect to our family of faith, as we are a people on mission here right in the heart of downtown Dunn, North Carolina. Take care. God bless. And we hope to see you in person at a worship service soon at 10:30 on Sunday mornings. God bless.